before we go for coffee, very quick one. You touched on it, but just to emphasize the fact, it's the fact that we've got these records in some places and not in others. That means that the history of some places will be more sketchy than others, because if you've got all your archive destroyed from time to time, you're not going to have the same sort of, you're not going to be able to answer the same sort of questions.
Well, that will lead on actually to something we may talk about, which is the video disc project afterwards, because it can be broken down into two things. What I thought you were going to ask me is, the records are here, but as it were, the Nagas or the tribal peoples from whom they came are there, and that's something we can talk about. But the problem you actually lighted on is that most countries, you can't discover their written histories. I was surprised because I did a sort of survey of archives around the world to see which other countries you could do what Sarah and I were doing on English village records of the 17th, 16th, 18th centuries. And there's nowhere. You can't do it even in Scotland. You can't do it in France. France has some good births, baptisms, marriages records, demographic records. But for the mass of the population were illiterate in France, and the local records were confined to a small elite. And anyway, there were these destructions, the French Revolution and so on, and wars and so on. So pre-19th century French history, you'd suddenly get on something like the Inquisition records, which Leroy-Ladurie used for Montaillou. You'd suddenly find this, or the return of Martin Guerre. You'd find a little pocket of something. But if you went to a French county and expected to select any old community and find out about what it was like in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, no way. Just like the housing has gone too. You wouldn't find the houses which you still find in England. So it's true of France, therefore it's also true of Italy, Spain, Germany, right, even Holland, for these reasons. What about the rest? India, no. I mean, Tom Kessinger wrote a historical book on Vilayat-Pur and so on. There are historical works on, but you really can't go back before the 19th century. You get, British records are often very good. Tax records and surveys and economic records are good, but you wouldn't get the wealth of materials. And then when you go further east, China, nothing. China is absolutely, occasionally you would find just a little pocket, some trial record or other, where the death of woman Wang, a very good book based on a particular case in China. But gazetteers, lots of gazetteers, the only sources really, the main ones are gazetteers, which are done very frequently. But they are government reports and they are filled with misinformation, because basically it's been ever thus in China. You set the local government a target and they write up their report on how they've achieved that target. So they are semi-fictional, but there is a lot of useful information. You have lives of illustrious women. These are usually widows who've killed themselves, and their lives are memorialized. And so you have those things. You have a lot of poetry, of course, and some travel accounts. And in the north, you have some military records of a demographic kind in the northern Manchu area. But if you went to a particular, even small town in China and asked what material there was before 1940, they might bring out a small suitcase, whereas in an English village, it might be, a number of filing cabinets. And Japan's the same. Japan is, being an island, it wasn't fought over so much. Climate's not so bad. So it's not as bad as China. And there are very good demographic records, household censuses, and every time you moved, you had to register. So there are these registration records and some ecclesiastical records going back to the 18th century. So you can do quite very good. My friend Hayami was the great demographer in Japan, and he did very good demographic work from the late 17th century. So it starts 300-400 years after England, and it's confined mainly to economic and demographic history. Although the late Tokugawa legal records are very good. I've got some volumes of them here transcribed. So it's sort of a quarter of the way towards England.